Michael had always loved long drives at night. There was something calming about the empty roads, the gentle hum of the engine, and the rhythmic passing of streetlights. Tonight was no different. He was returning from a weekend trip, the highway stretching endlessly ahead of him, surrounded by nothing but open fields and the occasional cluster of trees. The digital clock on the dashboard read 1:23 a.m. when he saw the detour sign. Road closed ahead. Use alt route. Michael frowned. He hadn't seen any announcements about roadwork. Still, he had no choice. He turned onto the narrow side road, his headlights cutting through the thick darkness. The trees on either side loomed high, their bare branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Minutes passed. The road twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the woods. His GPS recalculated, showing he would eventually merge back onto the highway. He sighed in relief until he noticed the fuel gauge. Less than a quarter tank. He checked his phone. No signal. Michael tightened his grip on the wheel. The road felt endless, the trees pressing in closer. Then he saw something up ahead, a dim glow. As he approached, he realized it was a gas station. Old, rundown, but open. The neon sign flickered. Last stop fuel. He pulled in, the tires crunching on the gravel. The place looked abandoned, no other cars, the windows covered in grime. A single bulb buzzed above the entrance. Stepping out, he noticed the air was unnaturally still. No wind, no chirping insects, just silence. He approached the pump and lifted the nozzle. The moment he pressed the trigger, a loud click echoed through the night. The pump wasn't working. Damn it! Michael turned toward the station. The door was slightly ajar. "Hello?" he called, stepping inside. The interior smelled of dust and old oil. Rows of empty shelves stood in disarray. An old register sat on the counter, the display cracked and dark. Behind the counter, a doorway led into a back room. Then, he heard a faint shuffling sound. Michael froze. "Hello?" He tried again, stepping cautiously toward the counter. A shadow moved past the doorway in the back. Someone was there. He cleared his throat. My car needs gas. Is anyone working?" No response. A cold chill ran down his spine. Something felt off. Then a voice, low and rasping, whispered from behind the doorway. "You shouldn't be here." Michael's breath caught in his throat. He took a slow step back. The door creaked open, revealing a man gaunt, hollow-eyed, dressed in tattered overalls. His face was pale, almost grayish, his eyes sunken deep into their sockets. "You need to go," the man croaked, his voice barely more than a breath. Michael nodded, backing toward the exit. "Yeah, I was just..." The man raised a trembling hand. "They're watching." Michael stopped. "Who's watching?" The man's lips barely moved. "The ones in the trees." A shiver ran down Michael's spine. He turned his head toward the windows. Beyond the gas station, in the tree line, dark figures stood between the trunks, still, watching. Panic surged through him. He bolted outside, rushing to his car. The figures didn't move, but their presence bore down on him, suffocating. He fumbled with his keys, yanking the door open. As he slid into the driver's seat, his headlights flickered. The figures were closer now, their faces obscured by shadow. The engine roared to life. Michael slammed the gas pedal, tearing out of the station. Gravel sprayed behind him as he sped down the road. He didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. The road stretched on endlessly, but he didn't stop. His heart pounded against his ribs. The trees blurred past, the darkness closing in. Then, another glow. Another gas station, identical to the one he had just left. His breath hitched. He drove past it, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Minutes later, the road looped again. The same gas station appeared. His pulse thundered in his ears. He slammed the brakes, his car skidding to a stop. The neon sign flickered. Last stop fuel. Number, no. He turned the wheel sharply, veering onto a dirt path. The tires kicked up dust as he sped forward, branches scraping against the car. He needed to escape. Then his headlights caught something ahead. A figure standing in the middle of the path. The man from the gas station. Michael screamed, jerking the wheel. The car skidded off the road, crashing into the trees. Pain exploded in his skull as everything went black. When he woke, dawn was breaking. The car was wrecked, the windshield cracked. His head throbbed. He forced the door open, stumbling out. The road was gone. The gas station, gone. Only endless trees surrounded him, and in the distance, shadowy figures stood watching, waiting. The last thing he heard before everything faded was a whisper carried by the wind. "You shouldn't be here."
Daniel had always been fascinated by urban exploration, abandoned buildings, forgotten tunnels, places where history had left its mark and time had erased it. But there was one place he had never dared to visit: Blackwood Asylum. The asylum had been shut down decades ago after a series of disturbing incidents. Stories circulated about missing patients, unethical experiments, and staff who had vanished without a trace. Over the years, the rumors only grew, and so did the legend of the asylum. One cold October night, Daniel decided it was finally time. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a crowbar for safety, he made his way through the rusted front gate. The air was thick with decay, the scent of rotting wood and mildew filling his lungs. The building stood tall, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring into the night. Inside, the silence was suffocating. His boots echoed against the peeling linoleum floors. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it recent, some so faded it seemed part of the original structure. He followed the dim beam of his flashlight down a long corridor, glancing at the rusted wheelchairs and overturned gurneys along the way. The first few rooms were empty, just collapsed beds and torn wallpaper. But then he found something that made him pause. A chair sat in the center of a room, with thick leather straps bolted to the armrests. The dust around it was undisturbed, as if it had been waiting for someone. His camera clicked as he snapped a picture, but the instant the flash went off, he heard something. A whisper. It was faint, almost carried by the wind. He turned sharply, his light cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. The hallway behind him stretched into nothingness. He swallowed hard and pressed forward. Then he saw the door. It was different from the others newer, with reinforced metal. A sign hung crookedly beside it. Restricted area. Do not enter. Every rational part of his mind told him to turn back, but he was too deep now. He pushed the door, and to his surprise, it creaked open, easily. Inside was a long, dark stairwell leading underground. Daniel hesitated. Then, taking a deep breath, he descended. The lower level was colder, the air damp and stale. The halls were narrower, lined with small windowless rooms. He peeked inside one. It was empty except for a small metal bed bolted to the floor. Shackles dangled from the wall. He stepped back, a shiver crawling up his spine. Whatever happened in this place had been worse than anyone had known. As he turned to leave, the door at the far end of the hall slammed shut. Daniel froze. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He raised his flashlight, but the beam flickered. Footsteps echoed from somewhere down the hall. "Hello?" he called, his voice unsteady. No answer. Just the rhythmic tapping of footsteps growing closer. Daniel backed up, gripping his crowbar tightly. The light flickered again, and for a split second, he saw movement to shape, darting past the doorway ahead. Then the whispers started again. This time, they were everywhere. Words he couldn't understand, overlapping, growing louder. He turned and ran, his boots slamming against the floor. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching impossibly far. Then, just as suddenly, the whispers stopped. Daniel skidded to a halt. He turned, panting, his flashlight trembling in his grip. The hallway was empty. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped backward. The silence pressed down on him like a weight. He reached the stairwell and bolted up, 2 steps at a time, refusing to look back. He made it to the first floor, racing toward the exit, when a voice cut through the air. "You shouldn't have come." Daniel whipped around. There, in the dim glow of his flickering flashlight, stood a figure. A patient's gown hung loosely over its skeletal frame. Its face was gaunt, eyes sunken, black pits staring at him. And then it lunged. Daniel screamed as the lights went out completely. The last thing he felt was ice-cold fingers wrapping around his throat. The next morning, Blackwood Asylum stood empty, just as it always had. The only sign that Daniel had ever been there was his camera, lying just outside the rusted gate. The last picture taken was a blurry image of a hollow-eyed figure, standing just inches behind him.
It started as a childhood dare. Hollow Street was just another forgotten alley in the old part of town, a place people walked past without a second glance. The buildings on either side were abandoned, their windows boarded up, their bricks crumbling. It was a dead-end street, leading nowhere except to the legend. Everyone in town had heard the story. Decades ago, a woman named Margaret Hollow had lived in the last house at the end of the street. She was a recluse, feared by the neighborhood children for her wild hair and muttering voice. They called her the Whisper Woman. One day, she vanished, and when the town sheriff went to check on her, he found the house empty, except for hundreds of scrawled messages covering the walls. Don't listen, don't answer, don't turn around. The legend went that if you stood in the middle of Hollow Street at midnight and whispered, "Margaret, are you there?" 3 times, you would hear her voice behind you. If you turned around, you would vanish just like she did. David, Marcus, and Lisa were the type of kids who loved proving legends wrong. So, on a cool autumn night, with only a flashlight and their phone cameras, they made their way to Hollow Street. The buildings loomed over them like silent watchers, the night air thick with an unnatural stillness. Marcus laughed as they reached the center of the street. "All right, who's brave enough?" David smirked. "I'll do it. It's just a dumb story." Lisa hesitated. "Guys, maybe we shouldn't." "Come on, Lisa, it's just a prank." David took a deep breath and whispered, "Margaret, are you there?" Silence. He whispered again, "Margaret, are you there?" A breeze stirred the dust around their feet. The air grew colder. "Margaret, are you there?" David whispered a final time. The flashlight flickered. Then a whisper, right behind them. Faint, but unmistakable. "I'm here." Lisa gasped. Marcus spun around, his breath ragged. "Wow-ho said that." David chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Nice try, guys. Who was it?" Lisa shook her head. "That wasn't us." The whisper came again, closer this time. "Don't listen, don't answer, don't turn around." The flashlight died completely. Darkness swallowed them. Panic set in. David fumbled for his phone, but his fingers were shaking too much. Lisa clutched Marcus's arm. "We have to get out of here, now." Then, footsteps. Not theirs. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. "Run!" Marcus shouted. They bolted for the entrance of the alley, their feet pounding against cracked pavement. But the whispers followed, surrounding them, seeping into their ears. "Don't listen. Don't answer. Don't turn around." Lisa risked a glance over her shoulder. A shadow moved at the alley's end, too tall, too thin, gliding toward them. Its voice slithered into her mind. "I see you," she screamed. David and Marcus didn't look back, didn't stop until they reached the main road. When they finally turned, Hollow Street was empty. Lisa was gone. They searched for hours, but there was no trace of her, no footprints, no sound, just silence. The next day, the police searched too, but Hollow Street had no answers, no signs of struggle, no clues. A week later, Marcus received a text from Lisa's phone. 3 words, "I'm still here." He never responded, and he never turned around again.
Liam had always prided himself on being a rational man. He didn't believe in ghosts, curses, or anything supernatural. But what happened on that rainy October night made him question everything. It started with a knock. Liam had been sitting alone in his small apartment, scrolling through his phone when he heard it 2 sharp knocks at his front door. Not 3, not 1, just 2. He lived on the 4th floor of a building with a secure entrance, and visitors always had to buzz in first. His heart thumped in mild confusion. He wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, he saw nothing. The hallway outside was empty, dimly lit by a flickering fluorescent light. He hesitated before slowly opening the door. Nobody. A gust of cold air rushed past him as he stepped into the hallway. He looked both ways. Silence. Just the hum of the building's old pipes. Shrugging it off, he closed the door and locked it. Then, exactly 5 minutes later, another 2 knocks. This time, the sound was louder, more urgent. Liam's skin prickled. He checked the peephole again, still nothing. He took a deep breath, gripping the doorknob, but something in his gut told him not to open it. Instead, he backed away and sat on his couch, staring at the door. He told himself it was a prank, a neighbor messing around, maybe even a weird echo from somewhere else in the building. But as the minutes ticked by, he couldn't shake the unease crawling up his spine. The knocking came again. 2 sharp, deliberate knocks. Liam jumped to his feet. This time, he refused to go near the door. Instead, he grabbed his phone and typed a message to his friend Kyle. "Hey, weird question, has anyone ever knocked on your door twice and then disappeared?" Kyle's reply came almost instantly. "Dude, don't open it. Whatever you do, don't open it." Liam frowned, his pulse quickening. "Why? What's going on?" Kyle's typing indicator appeared, then stopped. A minute passed. Then another. Finally, a response. "I'll explain later. Just don't answer the door." Liam's breath came in short bursts now. He could feel something shifting in the atmosphere of his apartment, like the air had grown heavier. Then the knocking came again. But this time, it wasn't from the front door. It was from inside the apartment. Liam's blood turned to ice. The sound came from his bedroom doorway, precise, calculated knocks. He turned, staring at the closed door at the end of the hallway. He hadn't heard anything move. He knew he was alone, but the knocks had been real. He swallowed hard. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. Slowly, he twisted it open. The room was empty, but something was different. The air smelled wrong damp, like old wood and mildew. His closet door, which had been shut just an hour ago, now stood slightly ajar. His stomach twisted into knots. Then, from the darkness inside the closet, came a whisper. "Let me in." Liam staggered back, slamming the bedroom door shut. He fumbled with his phone, trying to call Kyle, but his fingers felt numb. As the call rang, another message appeared on his screen. "It's too late. If you heard the inside knock, it already knows you're there." Liam's breath hitched. His eyes darted to the bedroom door. The whispering continued, soft but insistent. Then, the lights flickered. The bedroom door creaked open an inch on its own. Liam didn't wait. He bolted from his apartment, fleeing down the stairwell, never looking back. He spent the night in his car, too afraid to return. When he finally gathered the courage to go back the next morning, everything was normal. His apartment looked untouched. His bedroom door was closed. The closet sealed shut. But the moment he stepped inside, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "You should have knocked back."